They pulled me out of 3,000 years of silence to ask me one question, and when I answered it, they laughed at me. That is where this story begins. Not with the battle, not with the burning ships or the rescue pods or the moment an empire's greatest commander knelt on the deck of an enemy hospital ship and could not speak. It begins with laughter on the bridge of a warship called the Mouth That Closes, while an old creature stood in chains and begged an empire to turn around. I am Keth-Amaru. I am the last living member of the Vol-Surath, who once called themselves the Choir of Iron, who once ruled 1,100 worlds, and who no longer exist. I have outlived my species, my language, my gods, and every enemy I ever had except one. I have watched stars change color. I have forgotten more centuries than most species get to live. I am, as far as anyone has ever been able to measure, the oldest living thing in known space. And I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I did not survive because I was strong. I did not survive because I was clever or lucky or blessed. I survived because a human held my head above water when he had every reason to let me drown. Remember that. Hold on to it the way I have held on to it for 30 centuries. You will need it later, and so will everyone else in this story, and most of them will not understand that until it is far too late. Let me tell you where I was when they came for me. There is a moon, far out on the rim of the Vesari Drift, that has no name on any chart. The drift itself is a forgotten place, a scatter of dying stars and cold rocks that no empire has ever wanted, which is precisely why I chose it. The moon circles a gas giant the color of dried blood, and for 11 days out of every local month, the giant eclipses the distant sun entirely, and the world goes dark and still, and the only light comes from the aurora crawling across the ice like slow green fire. It is a cold place. The sky there is the color of old bruises, and the wind never fully stops. It just changes its mind about direction, hour after hour, year after year. And the ice sings at night. That is not a figure of speech. When the temperature drops past a certain point, the deep glacial plates contract and grind against one another, and the whole frozen ocean groans out a low, wandering music, like something enormous turning over in its sleep beneath your feet. The first century I lived there, that sound kept me awake. By the 3rd century, I could not sleep without it. I had lived there for 600 years, alone by choice. I kept a garden of stone. That is not a poetic phrase, and I want to explain it properly, because the Sskarn destroyed it in 11 seconds, and I think someone in this universe should know what it actually was. My people before the end learned to coax slow crystalline life out of mineral beds. Not machines, not sculpture, life of a kind. Lattices that fed on trace minerals and geothermal warmth and grew, truly grew, at the pace of 1 finger width per century. You would plant a seed crystal in the ice, and you would tend it clearing frost, adjusting the mineral feed, shielding it from the worst of the wind. And in return it would grow into a shape that no 2 gardeners could ever quite replicate. My people believed the shapes remembered the hands that tended them. I no longer know if that was science or faith. After enough centuries, the difference stops mattering. Every crystal in my garden was a name. That is what I did with my exile. Each formation was a person, crewmates from the Unbroken Hymn. My sisters I had 4. My teacher, Valensur, who begged our high command not to launch the harvest and was stripped of rank for it, and who died before he could learn how completely right he had been. The 19 fire wardens of my old deck watch. A woman named Setharu whom I would have bonded with, in another life, in a version of history where my species made one different decision. 2,000 years of names. Some crystals were taller than I am. The oldest one, my mother's, had grown so intricate that when the aurora passed behind it, it scattered green light across the ice in patterns I never got tired of watching. 600 years I tended them. I talked to them. I know how that sounds. When you are the last of something, you learn that talking to the dead is not madness. Madness would be silence. And then one morning, the sky tore open. I heard them before I saw them. That is always how it goes with warships. First a pressure in the air, a wrongness, the wind flattening out as if the whole atmosphere has flinched. The ice stopped singing. I remember that specifically. 600 years, and the ice had never once gone quiet on me, and it went quiet then, and I stood up from my mineral beds with my tools still in my hands, and I knew, before I saw anything, that my exile was over. Then the shriek of atmospheric entry, not one ship, 9. They came down through the bruise-colored clouds in a perfect wedge formation, black hulls ribbed and segmented like the inside of a throat, engines burning a shade of violet I had never seen. Big ships. Assault landers, military, built by a species that wanted its architecture to be understood at a distance. The weapons were mounted forward and prominent, not concealed, not streamlined, but displayed, the way a predator displays teeth. Ships designed to say one thing to every world they descended upon: we do not knock. They did not request permission to land. Empires never do. They landed on my garden. I want to be precise about this, because I have replayed it many times. They had an entire frozen ocean to set down on, flat ice in every direction to the horizon. Their sensors would have shown them the crystal formations clearly. 2,000 years of slow growth stands out against dead ice like a city stands out against desert. They saw it. They understood that it was made, that it was tended, that it was the only made thing on the entire world. They landed on it anyway. 9 ships on 9 landing struts each, and 2,000 years of names went to powder in the space of a single breath. My mother's crystal, the one that scattered the aurora, I watched a strut come down through it. It did not even slow the machinery down. 6 centuries of green light gone between one heartbeat and the next. I remember standing in the doorway of my shelter with my hands shaking, not from fear. I am too old for fear to work on me the way it used to. Fear needs a future to threaten, and I had stopped believing in mine a long time ago. My hands shook from something older than fear: recognition. Because I knew those hulls. Not this empire. I would learn soon enough that this empire was young, barely 4 centuries into its expansion, a child by my count. But I knew the shape of them, the hunger built into the architecture, the forward-mounted teeth. 3,000 years ago, my people built ships exactly like that. I served on one. I burned on one. We pointed a fleet of them at a small blue world in an unremarkable system. And that is why there is only one of us left, and he gardens graves on a moon with no name. The boarding ramps came down with a hiss of pressurized air, and the soldiers who descended were Sskarn. If you have never seen one, I will do my best. 6 limbs, 4 for walking, 2 for work and war, though they can trade those roles when they choose. Plated in dark chitin that clicks softly when they move, a sound like distant rain on a metal roof, so that a squad of them walking toward you sounds like weather coming. Each one stood nearly twice my height. Their breath steamed in the cold, and they did not like the cold. I could see it in the stiffness of their gait, but not one of them showed it in their bearing, and that told me something too. Disciplined, proud. An army that performs even when no one is watching, because it believes something is always watching. History, maybe. Their ancestors, their own legend. Their leader wore a mantle of red fiber across one shoulder. He walked through the powdered remains of my garden without looking down, stopped a few paces from my door, and looked at me the way you look at furniture. Not with contempt. Contempt would have required him to consider me. This was inventory. "You are the relic," he said. His translator rendered it flat and bored, not a question. "I am a gardener," I said. He turned his head slowly, taking in the crushed stone garden, the shattered crystal ground into the ice beneath his landers, the glittering dust that 600 years of my life had become. Then he made a sound I would come to know very well in the weeks that followed. A wet clicking, deep in the throat, rhythmic. Sskarn laughter. "Not anymore," he said. I did not fight them. I want to be honest about that too. There is a version of this story where the ancient survivor rages, where he makes them earn it. That is not what happened. What happened is that two soldiers netted me with a weighted mesh, the way you would net an animal, and a third gathered my tools and my recorder stones as supporting artifacts, and they carried me up the ramp between them with my feet not touching the ground. The young one carrying my left side, I could tell he was young by the pale edges of his chitin, not yet darkened, kept his eyes fixed straight ahead the entire way. But at the top of the ramp, just before the dark of the hold swallowed us, he did something the others did not. He turned his head just slightly and looked back at the ruined garden, at the powder, at the one crystal stump still standing near my door, Sskarn as it happened, sheared off at knee height. He looked at it for perhaps 2 seconds. Then he faced forward again, and his grip on the net tightened, and we went inside. I filed that away. 2 seconds of looking. You learn when you have lived as long as I have, that empires are not made of ideology. They are made of individuals performing certainty they do not always feel. And every so often, one of them looks back at the thing his empire just crushed for 2 seconds when he thinks no one can see. Remember him too, the young soldier, he matters later. The last thing I saw of my moon through the closing jaws of the cargo ramp was the wind already beginning to cover the wreckage with snow, the way it covers everything there patiently without judgment. And as the ramp sealed, the ice, I swear this is true, started singing again, low and long. It sounded to me like it was saying goodbye. Or perhaps like it was saying, you already know how this ends, you have seen it before. That was the whole problem I had. They transferred me from the lander to something much larger in orbit, and I want to spend a moment on that ship, because you cannot understand what happened later unless you understand what the Sskarn Dominion had built. The flagship was called the Mouth That Closes. I learned later that the name comes from a Sskarn creation story. In the beginning, the story goes, the universe was a mouth that opened, and everything that exists poured out of it, and at the end of all things the mouth will close again, and the Sskarn believe it is their role to be the closing, the teeth of the ending. It is, as imperial theologies go, more honest than most. My people dressed our conquests in the language of music and harmony, the choir of iron. We sang while we burned worlds. At least the Sskarn admitted they were a mouth. The ship itself was 31 kilometers of layered black hull, and it was old, older than the crew serving on it, older than some of the species serving on it, scarred and patched and re-armored across 400 years of continuous war. Empires build their first flagship as a statement. They keep it as a scripture. Every conscript who came aboard the Mouth That Closes walked through an entry hall lined with the melted, salvaged hull plates of 61 flagships it had destroyed, each plate engraved with the name of the species that built it, and the length of time that species had lasted against the Dominion. 61 plates. The longest campaign recorded on any of them was 4 years. The shortest was 9 days. I was carried past that wall in a suspension cage, and I read every plate and I thought, 9 days. You have that number displayed as a trophy. 9 days is your record for how quickly a species can fall. 3,000 years ago, 9 days is how long it took the humans to break the greatest fleet my people ever built. The same number, hanging on both sides of history. I do not believe in omens, but I noticed it, and my hands inside the cage would not stop shaking. For 11 days, no one spoke to me at all. They hung my cage in the Hall of Tributes, deep in the ship's core in the dark. And I do mean hung. The cage was suspended from the ceiling on a ceremonial chain, positioned between the other trophies, part of the display. To my left, in a stasis column, floated the crown of the Ithran God Queen, a ring of living silver that still moved, very slowly, searching for a head that had been dust for a century. To my right, the fossilized heart of the last Leviathan of Mox, a mass of black stone the size of a shuttle, taken from a creature that had swum between moons. A dead queen's crown, a dead titan's heart, and me. The theme of the room was not subtle. These are the great things we have outlasted. For 11 days I hung in the dark and I listened to the ship, because listening was all I had, and because you can learn a great deal about a people from the sound of their vessel. Human ships, I would be reminded much later, hum with talk. Corridors full of complaint and laughter and argument and someone always, somewhere, singing badly. Human crews leak humanity at every seam. The mouth that closes was nearly silent. Boots in rhythm, always in rhythm. Even off-duty crews fell into step without seeming to notice. Orders given once, never repeated, never questioned. Machinery maintained so precisely that the ship's great engines were only a feeling in the bones, not a sound. And every so often, drifting down some corridor, that wet clicking laughter, always brief, always in groups, and always, as far as I could ever tell, at someone's expense. In 11 days, I never once heard laughter that sounded like joy. A ship like a held breath, 61 victories in 400 years, all of it held in the lungs, waiting for a permission to exhale that was never going to come, because the next campaign always came first. On the 4th day, they assigned a soldier to bring my nutrient rations, and here the universe showed me its sense of humor, because the soldier they assigned was the young one, the one with the pale-edged chitin, the one who had looked back at my garden for 2 seconds. His name, I learned it slowly, over many silent meals, was Tesek. 3rd Caste Infantry, which in the Dominion meant his family had been folded into the Empire recently enough that full citizenship was still 2 generations of loyal service away. He was, by his own species count, barely an adult. He would set the ration tray in the cage's transfer slot, and he would stand at exact regulation distance while I ate, because regulations required the trophy be observed during feeding, and he would not meet my eyes. 11 days. Not once. But on the 9th day, as he turned to leave, he stopped, faced the door, and without turning around he said quietly in a voice pitched below the range of the hall's monitors, "The formations on the ice, the crystal," a long pause, "what were they?" "Names," I said. Another pause, longer. "Whose?" "Everyone I failed to save." He stood there for a moment with his back to me. The plates across his shoulders shifted, resettled, a Sskarn gesture I did not yet know how to read. Then he left, and the hall went dark again, and he did not speak to me again for some time. But he had asked, "Do you see? 1100 worlds of my own people, 400 years of his, and empires fall in the end not to fleets. They fall to the individuals inside them who begin, quietly, against regulation, to ask what the crushed things were." I did not know it yet, but 30 light years away, the humans were already counting on exactly that. They had built their entire way of war around it. They had been perfecting it for 3,000 years. On the 12th day, they came for me with ceremony. 4 soldiers in dress plating, a hose down with sterilizing mist. The indignity of it did not even register anymore. When you have been a trophy for 12 days, you stop keeping accounts of indignity. They draped me in a gray shift, the garment the Dominion reserves for exhibits, and they walked, this time, my own feet on their deck, which I understood was itself a statement. See, the relic moves, the relic is alive, the gift breathes through 14 decks and 3 security rings to the bridge of the mouth that closes. And that is where I saw him for the first time. Varric D. Helm, High Talon of the Dominion, commander of the Grand Fold Fleet, the most celebrated soldier of his species' entire recorded history. I will describe him honestly, because he deserves that much, and by the end of this story you will understand why I insist on it. He was old for a Sskarn, his chitin gone the deep matte black of extreme age, no gloss left to it, like iron that has been through fire so many times it no longer bothers to shine. The entire left side of his carapace was scarred where some forgotten battle had melted the plating. It had regrown in ropey whorls, and he had never had it resurfaced, though a commander of his rank could have. He wore the damage the way other officers wore their mantles. He was not loud. That was the first surprise. I had expected a shrieker, a chest beater, the kind of commander that young empires love to mint and put on recruitment banners. Varric Dehalm was quiet the way deep water is quiet. He stood at the center of that vast bridge, and it was vast, a cathedral of displays and stations, easily 200 officers at their posts, and he did not raise his voice once in the entire time I knew him, and when he spoke, the bridge did not merely fall silent. It leaned in. 200 officers, leaning a degree closer to the center of the room, without one of them appearing to move. I have met perhaps 5 beings in 3,000 years with that kind of gravity. It is not rank. Rank can be issued. That has to be earned, one impossible decision at a time, across a lifetime. He looked at me for a long time, longer than protocol needed, longer than was comfortable. His 4 eyes, too large, too small, the small one set higher and always moving, traveled over me with an attention I had not felt directed at my person in centuries. Not the inventory stare of the officer on the moon. He was actually looking, trying to see the 3,000 years maybe, trying to see what the weight of it had done. "They tell me," he said at last, "that you are 3,000 years old." 3,140, I said. "Give or take a decade. Calendars are difficult when your civilization keeps ending." Wet clicking rippled around the bridge stations. Laughter. Dehalm did not laugh. One of his small eyes flicked toward the sound and it stopped, instantly, the way a flame stops when the air is removed. "They tell me you were there when the Volsureth fell," he said, "that you served in their last great fleet, that you have personally witnessed the death of an empire of 1,100 worlds from the inside." He stepped closer. He moved the way he spoke, without waste. He smelled of oiled chitin and something colder underneath it, like the air before snow. "Do you know why I had you brought to me, Relic?" "I assumed I was a gift," I said. "The dead queen's crown was getting lonely." The small eyes narrowed. I could not tell if it was irritation or the Sskarn version of a smile, and I suspect he preferred it that way. "You are a gift," he said. "My officers crossed 40 light years to net you, because it is the custom of the fold that a great commander receives a great trophy before a great conquest, and there is no greater trophy in known space than the oldest living thing in it." He turned, gesturing with one work limb at the enormous tactical display behind him. "And in 19 days, I begin the greatest conquest in the history of my people." So it occurred to me, and I will confess this thought arrived in the night, the way the honest ones do, that before I take 2 million soldiers across the dark, I might do something no commander of the fold has ever had the opportunity to do. I might ask the oldest survivor in the universe a single question. Consider it an honor. Most trophies are not consulted. "Ask," I said. And the whole bridge went still, genuinely still, 200 officers pausing at their stations, because I think every one of them wanted to hear what the old commander would ask the old monster. Great men's questions are prophecies to the people who serve them. "In 3,140 years, said Varric Dehalm, "in everything you have seen, the death of your empire, the deaths of others, whatever moves in the dark places that we are too young to have met, answer me this. What is the most dangerous thing you have ever seen?" And there it was, the question, the one they woke me for. The one they crushed my garden for and crossed the drift for, so that the great commander could hear some tale of leviathans or plague fleets or dead gods, nod gravely, feel the weight of deep history settle on his shoulders like a second mantle, and fly to his conquest anointed. He wanted a story. What he had captured, though, what was standing on his bridge in a gray shift, with 3,000 years of exactly one story inside it, was a warning. I looked past him at the tactical display. It was already dressed for the campaign. Fleet groupings, supply lines, jump corridors, and there at the center of it all, ringed in the harsh angles of Sskarn targeting script, a single star system. A small yellow star, unremarkable, 8 worlds and some debris, third planet circled twice. I felt everything inside me go very still and very cold, the way the moon went still before the landers broke through the clouds. You never forget that star. I had seen it once with my own eyes, 3,000 years ago, growing larger in the viewport of a warship full of people who were all about to learn, in 9 days, everything they thought they knew was wrong. I had spent 30 centuries seeing it again every time I closed my eyes. I had crossed half a galaxy and 3,000 years, and I was standing on the bridge of a warship pointed at Earth. "High Talon," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "The most dangerous thing I have ever seen in 3,000 years is on your display right now. It is that yellow star. It is that blue world. And I am begging you, I, who have not begged for anything in 30 centuries, who did not beg when your soldiers crushed 600 years of my dead, turn this fleet around. Choose any other star in the sky. Choose all of them at once and I will believe you can take them. But not that one. Never that one." Silent, one full breath of real silence. And then the bridge of the mouth that closes filled with laughter. Wet, clicking, from 200 throats at once, rolling around that cathedral of a room, officers turning from their stations to look at the ancient relic that had been asked for wisdom and produced comedy. The fleet signals officer laughed so hard his plates rattled. Someone near the weapons stations repeated my words, "Not that one, never that one," in a warbling imitation of my voice, and the laughter doubled. Only 2 beings on that bridge were not laughing. Me. And Varric Dehaum, who had not moved, who was watching me with all 4 eyes, and who had noticed, I saw him notice, saw the small eyes flick down and hold, that my hands were shaking again. Not my voice held, my hands never learned how. "Silence," he said. He did not say it loudly. The laughter did not fade, it ceased, cut clean, 200 throats closing at once. "Explain," he said to me. So I explained. Standing in a gray shift in front of an empire at the height of its certainty, I told them the thing I had carried alone longer than their civilization had existed. And you should hear it too, all of it, because this is the center of everything, the warning itself, exactly as I gave it. "You have read your scout reports on this species," I said. "Humans. Your analysts have counted their warships and mapped their defense grids and measured their industrial output, and they have concluded that the human worlds will fall within a single campaign season. I have no doubt the mathematics are excellent. Your analysts are not wrong about the numbers. The numbers were never the danger. Listen to me. 3,000 years ago, my people made the same maps. We were older than your dominion is now, older, larger, and I promise you, crueler. 1,100 worlds sang in the choir of iron. We had ended 40 civilizations, and we did not even keep trophies, because ending civilizations had become too routine to commemorate. We found their little blue planet when they had barely left its surface. They were fragile, scattered across one system, still burying their dead in dirt. Our war scholars projected the campaign at 40 days and named it the harvest, and I need you to understand our contempt precisely. We did not send our best fleet. We sent an ordinary one. I was on it. Fire officer, second watch on a cruiser called the Unbroken Hymn. And yes, High Talon, I hear the irony in that name. I have had 3,000 years to hear it. The harvest broke in 9 days. Not 40, 9. And not to weapons we failed to anticipate, to decisions we failed to anticipate. Humans do not fight the war you plan for. They study the war you plan for, they let you commit to it, and then they fight some other war, sideways to yours, that only makes sense in hindsight. Your 61 victories will not warn you, because the humans will have studied those too. By now they know how the fold fights better than the fold does. But even that is not the warning. Empires lose battles. Empires survive lost battles. Mine survived dozens. What nothing survives, hear me, is what humans do after they have beaten you. When the harvest broke, our fleet was dying in the black around their world, reactors failing, atmosphere bleeding from 1,000 hulls, escape pods drifting with hours of air. And every law of war we knew, every law you know, said what came next. They finish us. You end the enemy in the water. That is what victory is. That is what we would have done. That is what you would do. They launched rescue ships instead. Into their own debris fields. Into radiation. Into hulls that were still firing on them. I want that understood. Some of our ships were still shooting, and the humans flagged those hulls for later and went to the quiet ones first. Human crews cut through our armor to reach our crew spaces. They dragged our soldiers out of vacuum, soldiers who 9 days earlier had been burning their cities. And they put us in their own medical bays, next to their own wounded, and human doctors who had buried their own children that same week stayed awake for 3 days learning our biology from nothing, so that our wounded would stop dying on their tables. I know this because I was one of the wounded. My voice failed there. On the bridge in front of all of them it cracked and failed, and 200 officers heard 3,000 years crack open. I did not try to hide it. Some things should be witnessed. The unbroken hymn burned around me. I burned with her. A compartment flooded coolant, seawater, I never learned which. We came down in one of their oceans, and I was pinned in the dark with the water rising, and I remember being calm because I understood the story I was in. I had helped write that story onto 40 other species. I knew how it ended. A human pulled me out. He was a rescue diver off one of their coastal ships, and he could not free my legs from the wreckage, so he did the only thing he could do. He held my head above the water. For 2 hours, in the cold, in the dark, in the wreck of a ship that had spent 9 days killing his people, this human held my head up and waited for cutting equipment. And I spent those 2 hours telling him what we had done, everything, the cities, the counts. I confessed like a dying priest, because I wanted him to understand exactly what he was holding, and I wanted him to drop me. I wanted the ending I understood. I begged him for it. He was 19 years old, and he said, I have had 3,000 years to forget this, and I cannot. I have tried, he said. Yeah, I know what you did. I stopped. The bridge waited. Even the display seemed to wait. Hold still anyway. You could have heard frost forming on that bridge. Somewhere behind me, one of the officers who had laughed hardest shifted his weight, and the click of his plates sounded like a gunshot in all that quiet. They healed 40,000 of us, I said. They fed us. They let us grieve our dead. They helped us grieve our dead. They returned bodies to us with honors, with their own soldiers standing at attention. And I watched veterans of ours weep at that. Warriors of the choir who had never wept at anything. Because there is no armor anywhere in the universe rated against being treated as a person by someone you tried to destroy. And then, High Talon, they did the thing that killed my empire. The thing your analysts will never model because it does not look like a weapon. They sent us home, all of us. No tribute, no chains, no occupation, no treaty carving up our worlds, no demand but one, that we carry our own wounded onto the transports ourselves and see them settled and know what it costs to keep them alive. Then they let us go. 40,000 survivors, released into the heart of an empire of 1,100 worlds. And every single one of us was carrying the same disease. The disease was the memory of their mercy. There is no quarantine for it. There is no cure. You cannot build an empire out of soldiers who have been forgiven by their victims. It does not work. The machinery of conquest runs on a story that the enemy is lesser, that the strong take, that there is no other way the universe can be arranged. 40,000 of us came home knowing, not believing but knowing, the way you know a burn, that the story was a lie. We had seen the other way with our own eyes. We had been carried in its arms. The choir tried everything, censored the accounts, reassigned the survivors to opposite ends of the empire. executed the loudest of us, and every execution made 10,000 new listeners, because you can kill a traitor, high talent, but you cannot kill a story. And a story a government kills people to stop is a story every citizen becomes desperate to hear. Within 1 century, the choir of iron could not reliably crew its warships. The young refused to serve, and when the old tried to explain why the refusal was treason, they found they could not finish their own sentences. Within 3 centuries, the empire dissolved itself. Not conquered, no one fired on us. Dissolved. 1,100 worlds, one by one, quietly voted to put down the sword, unbraided the empire, and became 1,100 separate peoples again, most of whom no longer remember they were ever the choir. The humans never fired another shot at us. They did not need to. They had already fired the only shot that mattered, and it took 300 years to finish landing. That is what humans are. Not the strongest thing I have seen in 3,000 years. I have seen stronger. Strength is common. The most dangerous. Because every other power in this galaxy wins wars by ending lives, and humans have learned how to win wars by ending certainties. And an empire, high talent, is made of nothing else. You are taking 61 folded species into that system. 2 million crew, and how many are Sskarn? A third. The rest are conscripts from worlds you conquered, serving because the story says the fold is inevitable. You are carrying your empire's entire theology into the one system in the galaxy that specializes in disproving theologies. If even one ship of yours limps home carrying what my ship carried home, the fold is finished. Not this year, not this century, but finished, and nothing you do afterward will stop it because you cannot unring mercy. Turn around, I am begging you, not for the humans' sake. The humans do not need my protection. It has been 3,000 years, and everything I have heard across every long-range channel in that time tells me they have only gotten better at this. They have made rescue a doctrine. They have made mercy a fleet posture. I am begging for yours, high talent, for the young soldier who brings my rations and cannot meet my eyes. Turn around. I stopped. My throat was raw in a way it had not been in 600 years. I had not spoken that many words aloud since before my exile began. The bridge was so quiet I could hear the trophy hall chain still swaying somewhere in my memory. The officers had stopped laughing somewhere around the flooded compartment. Now they stood in a kind of embarrassed rigidity, 200 soldiers of an undefeated empire, each one waiting to see which way their commander's silence would break, because whichever way it broke, that would be the way they had all felt about my story all along. That is how empires work. Varek Dhelm was silent for a long time, longer than a commander is supposed to be silent in front of his bridge. His small eyes had gone still, both of them, fixed on me, and that, I would learn, was the rarest thing Varek Dhelm's face could do. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost gentle. That was the terrible thing about it. Gentleness from him in that moment. It meant he had actually listened. It meant what came next was not ignorance. "Old one," he said, "I believe you." A tremor went through the bridge, nothing visible, but I felt it, 200 certainties flinching at once. That is what no one in this room expects me to say, so I will say it plainly for the record. I believe every word. I believe your empire met these humans and broke against them in 9 days. I believe a human boy held your head above the water. I believe they sent 40,000 of you home, and I believe the story you carried unmade 1,100 worlds without another shot fired. I have commanded soldiers for 160 years, and I know the sound of a true report. Nothing you have said tonight is false. He turned to the display, to the small yellow star and its circled blue world, and he stood there with his scarred side toward me, and he tapped one claw tip against earth once softly. "But you have told me the story of a sick empire that met a strong enemy," he said. "The Vol-Sureth fell to mercy because the Vol-Sureth were already hollow, 40 conquests deep in a story they had stopped believing themselves. so rotted with routine that they didn't even send their best fleet. Mercy did not kill your empire, Relic. Mercy was merely the wind. Your empire was the dead tree. The fold is not hollow. I have spent my life making sure of it. And you have shown me something else. Something your 3,000 years apparently never taught you to see because you were underneath the event and I am above it. He tapped the display again. You have handed me the most valuable intelligence report in Dominion history. You have told me that this species' supreme weapon is restraint. That in the moment of victory, they hesitate. That they will divert warships to rescue operations. That they will pull my drowning soldiers out of the water and spend 3 days keeping them alive. An enemy that rescues you, said High Talon Varric Dehaum, is an enemy that has already decided not to do what it takes to win. They have chosen their limit and published it across 3,000 years. I have no limit. That is the entire difference, and it is the only difference that has ever mattered in war. He turned back to me, and I searched all 4 of his eyes for cruelty, for arrogance, for the strut of the officer who had crushed my garden and found none of it. That is what I need you to understand about Varric Dehaum. He was not a fool. He was something far more dangerous than a fool. He was a brilliant, honest, undefeated man who had followed flawless logic to the edge of a cliff his entire civilization insisted was a road. Thank you for the warning, he said, with what I believe was genuine courtesy. It has been more useful than you intended. You will accompany the fleet. A relic should witness the making of new history, and besides, the small eyes glinted. If you are right, old one, you would never forgive me for leaving you behind. Return him to the hall. Signal all groups. Set course for the human system. Full fleet. They walked me from the bridge, and I did not resist, because there was no longer any point. Behind me, I heard the campaign begin. Calm, unhurried orders, acknowledgments rippling out station by station. The sound of an empire stepping off a cliff it had been assured was a road. 318 warships. 2 million crew, most of them conscripts from 61 folded worlds. The greatest fleet the Sskarn Dominion had ever assembled, turning as one, with a kind of terrible ceremonial grace, toward a small blue world that had asked for none of this. That night Tessek brought my rations early. He set the tray in the slot, and he stood at regulation distance, and for the first time in 12 days he met my eyes. Is it true, he asked below the monitors, what you said on the bridge? It is being repeated on every deck. 60,000 crew heard it before the watch changed. A pause, his plates shifted. The human, the one in the water, is it true? Every word, I said. He stood there a moment longer. Then he said something I did not expect, something no Sskarn was supposed to say, and he said it so quietly I nearly missed it. My grandmother's people lasted 11 days against the fold. It is on the wall by the airlock. 11 days, and then we were folded, and now I carry their teeth to a war I was never asked about. He looked at the dead queen's crown, still circling slowly in its column, still searching. I hope you are wrong, Relic, and I think I hope you are right. Is it possible to hope both? That, I told him, is the most human question anyone has asked me in 3,000 years. He left. The hall went dark, and hanging there between the crown and the fossil heart, I did something I had not done since the unbroken hymn burned. I prayed not for the humans. Humans have never once needed my prayers. I prayed for the crews around me, for Tessek and his grandmother's teeth, for every conscript from 61 folded species sleeping in those 318 hulls, dreaming an empire's dream of one more easy victory. Because I alone, in all that fleet, knew precisely what was waiting for them in the quiet at the edge of that yellow star's light. And the worst of it, the very worst, is that what waited for them was not death. Death they were prepared for. Death the fold understood. What waited for them was kindness, arriving at the exact moment they would be least able to survive it. The fleet jumped that night, 30 light years to cross. And far ahead of us, out in the cold dark past the orbit of the 8th world, where the sun is just the brightest star among stars, Something small and patient had already begun to move. The humans already knew we were coming. Humans always know. 30 light years is a long time to think about a warning you have already decided to ignore. The crossing took 41 days. Jump, cool the drives, jump again. 318 ships moving through the dark in a formation so precise it could have been carved from a single block of iron. And I want to tell you about those 41 days, because everyone who tells war stories skips the crossing, and the crossing is where this story actually turned. Battles only reveal what the crossing has already decided. For the first 10 days, the fleet was loud by Sskarn standards, which means the silence had edges on it. Victory hymns before each jump. Officers running assault drills at double rotation. The mouth that closes hummed with the specific energy of 2 million beings who have been told they are about to make history and mostly believe it. Mostly. Because something else was moving through those 318 hulls, deck by deck, mess by mess, in the spaces between regulation. My warning. 60,000 crew heard what I said on that bridge before the first watch changed. By the third jump, it was the whole flagship. By the 10th, ships I had never set foot on were repeating it, because fleets in transit have nothing but time and calm traffic, and a story travels faster than any signal when the story has teeth. I know this because Tessek told me. He had begun to linger at ration times. Regulation said he had to observe the trophy feed. Regulation did not say from how far or in what silence, and Tessek had discovered the gap between those two rules and moved into it like a tenant. They are calling it the Relic's Curse, he told me, somewhere past the 15th jump. The story, the water, the human who said hold still. The officers forbid the telling of it, which means it is now told perfectly, word for word, because forbidding a story is how you teach an empire to memorize it. He paused. You knew that would happen when you spoke on the bridge. You were not warning the High Talon at all. You were seeding the fleet. 3,000 years, and the young still surprise me. I was doing both, I said. A warning refused becomes a seed. That is not strategy, Tessek, that is just how truth behaves. He was quiet for a while, then, the conscript decks are frightened, not of the humans, of the choice. Fear of an enemy is simple, we are trained for it, bred for it. But you have given 61-folded species a rumor that there is another way to be strong, and now they are lying awake doing arithmetic with their own histories, and there is no drill for that. His plates shifted. My bunk brother is Ithran. His people lasted 2 years against the fold, the second longest on the wall. Last night he asked me, in the dark, whether I thought the humans would be able to tell the difference between the Sskarn and the rest of us, when the time came. And what did you tell him? I told him to sleep. Tessek looked at the dead queen's crown, the way he always did, the silver ring still turning, still searching. I did not tell him that I have been asking the ceiling the same question for 11 jumps. Understand what was happening. Varek Dehaum was crossing 30 light years with the greatest fleet his species had ever built. And inside that fleet, in the dark, in the space between regulations, 2/3 of his crews were quietly rehearsing a question no empire can survive its soldiers asking. If the enemy shows me mercy, what exactly am I defending? Dehaum knew. Of course he knew. A commander like that hears his own fleet the way I heard the ice sing. On the 22nd day he came to the Hall of Tributes himself, alone, unannounced, at an hour when the ship pretended to sleep. He stood in front of my cage for a long moment. Then he said, "You have infected my fleet, Relic." "No, High Talon. Your fleet asked me a question in front of 200 witnesses. I answered it. The infection was crossing 30 light years to pick a fight with the cure." The wet clicking, once brief. From him it almost sounded like appreciation. My intelligence officers wanted you spaced. My political officers want you spaced. Do you know why you are still breathing? Because you believe me, I said. And a man who kills the only witness to the thing he intends to disprove has already confessed he cannot disprove it. The small eyes went still, both of them. 160 years, he said quietly, and no one on this ship has spoken to me like that since my first commander died. He turned to go, and then stopped, his scarred side to me, and said the thing I have thought about every day since. I read the full archive on your harvest, old one. Everything our historians recovered, and I found the detail you left off my bridge. The human rescue diver, the boy in the water. Your records say you searched for him after that you learned his name. Yes, I said. Say it. Ellis, I said, and my voice did what it always does. Petty Officer Dana Ellis. He died 40 years later, old age in a coastal town with grandchildren. He never once spoke publicly about the war. When my people's envoys finally traced him and asked him decades on why he held up the head of a monster that had confessed everything, do you know what he said? He said, because it was drowning. They pressed him. Surely there was more. Doctrine, faith, orders. He seemed genuinely confused by the question. It was drowning, he said. What else would the reason be? Varric Dehaum stood in the dark of his trophy hall, between the crown and the heart, and said nothing for so long that I thought he had turned to stone. That is what you are flying toward, High Talon, I said. Not a fleet. A species that produces that answer by default at 19, under no orders, and finds the question confusing. 318 ships. How many Elises do you suppose they have now? He left without answering, but his stride, going, was slower than his stride arriving, and in 160 years I suspect no one else had ever managed to do that to him. On the 39th day, we made the final jump, and the fleet fell out of the dark at the edge of the human system, beyond the 8th world, in the halo of ice and silence where their sun is just the brightest star among stars. And here is where I must slow down, because what met the fleet out there was the first thing that went wrong, and it went wrong in a way none of them had a category for. Nothing met them. You must understand what Sskarn doctrine expected. 61 campaigns had taught them the grammar of arrival. You drop out of jump at the system's edge, and within hours the defenders' picket lines light up, panicked traffic floods every channel, colonies scream for evacuation, and the defending fleet scrambles into whatever desperate posture it can manage. The arrival is a weapon. 318 ships appearing at your door is designed to break a species' nerve before the first shot. The human system did not scramble. It did not panic. It did not even appear to notice, and that was worse, because every passive sensor on every Sskarn ship could see the system was inhabited to its edges. Stations in the ice halo, mining lattices among the outer moons, traffic between worlds, calm and constant glittering lanes of it, a civilization going about its evening. For 6 hours the fleet hung there, weapons hot, listening to a system that declined to be afraid of it. I am told the silence did more damage to morale than a lost battle would have. Fleets know how to grieve a battle. No one trains for being ignored. Then in the 7th hour, one ship came out to meet them. One. It was small, I have to be honest about how small. Against the mouth that closes it was a splinter, a courier-weight hull, maybe 90 meters, running every light it had. Not stealthed, not evasive. It flew straight up the fleet's axis of advance at an unhurried cruise, broadcasting its identity in the clear on every band, in perfect Sskarn trade dialect, which meant they had known the fold was coming for a very long time and had bothered to learn its language. The ship's name in their own tongue was Halcyon. The translation the humans offered alongside it was, a period of calm before storms. Even their ship names are warnings. I do not think the fleet understood that yet. Dehaum had me brought to the bridge for the parley. He wanted the relic present. I believe now, looking back, that some part of him wanted a witness who would understand what he was looking at. So I stood in my gray shift at the edge of that cathedral of a bridge, and I watched live, as the main display filled with the interior of the Halcyon and the human on it. She was standing. No throne, no raised chair, no banked rows of officers arranged like teeth. Just a small bridge, a handful of crew at their stations behind her, and a woman of maybe 50, gray threaded through dark hair, wearing a plain duty uniform with a name strip and a single insignia. She had a cup of something hot in one hand. I want that detail in the record. She met the greatest armada in Sskarn history holding a cup of tea, and she did not put it down. "Good evening," she said in their language, and the translation rolled out beneath it. "My name is Commander Amara Sese, United Systems vessel Halcyon. I'm the ranking officer for this volume of the Outer System, which makes you my guests, so let's be straightforward with each other." She took a sip. "We've been watching you since you were 19 jumps out. We know your fleet composition to the hull number. We know you are the Fold, we know what the Fold does, and we know why you're here. So here is Earth's entire message, and I'm going to say it slowly, because I'm told empires have trouble hearing it the first time. Turn around. Nothing here belongs to you and nothing here will. There will be no negotiation over territory, no tribute, and no folding. But there will also be no pursuit, no reprisal, and no dishonor in leaving. You arrived with 318 ships. You are welcome to leave with 318 ships. Every one of your crew can go home. That door is open right now, and I am asking you, genuinely asking, one professional to another, to walk through it." The bridge of the mouth that closes rippled with the beginnings of the wet clicking. One ship, one woman with a cup of tea, lecturing an armada. Helm silenced it with a glance. He stepped forward into the display's field of view. "You know what we are," he said, "so you know what happens now. I have crossed 30 light years, Commander. 61 species stand behind my hull plates. I do not turn around." "No," Sese said, and there was something in her voice I recognized across 3,000 years, something that made my hands begin to shake against the chain of my restraints. Not anger, not fear, sorrow. The professional sorrow of someone who has read the file, knows exactly how this goes, and has to watch it go that way anyway. "I didn't think you would. They almost never do. All right, High Talon. Then hear the second half of the message, because we say this to everyone, and we have never once broken it. Fight us and we will take your fleet apart. We will do it faster than your doctrine allows for and in ways your doctrine doesn't have names for. But we will be shooting at your ships, High Talon, not your people. Engines, weapons, sensors. We do not target crew spaces. We do not fire on lifeboats, we catch them. Any hull that goes dark and cold is out of the fight and under our protection from that moment, including from you. Wounded will be treated. Dead will be returned with honors. And when it is over, every survivor goes home. That is not a threat and it is not a mercy. It is just what is going to happen, and I am required by my government and by about 3,000 years of habit to tell you in advance." She set the cup down then, finally, and she looked into the pickup, and I will swear to my dying day that she was not looking at Helm any longer. She was looking past him into the bridge, at the 200 officers, at the fleet beyond, at every conscript on every deck who would watch this recording within the hour. Because she knew exactly what parleys are actually for. "To the crews of the Fold fleet," said Commander Sese. "Not the command staff, the crews. 61 species, most of you conscripted from worlds this empire broke. Earth sees you. When your ship goes dark, and it will do nothing. Stay at your posts, stay calm, and wait for us. We are coming for every single one of you, and we know the difference." A pause. "We have always known the difference." Halcyon out. The display went dark, and the silence on that bridge afterward was not Sskarn discipline. It was 200 officers simultaneously realizing that the enemy's opening move, before a single shot, had been to speak directly past their commander to their crews, and that there was no counter to it, because the only counter would be to promise the crews something better, and the Fold had nothing better to promise. The Fold had never needed anything to promise. It had only ever needed to be inevitable. Helm stood looking at the dark display for a long moment. "Analysis," he said at last. His intelligence chief stepped forward, plates flat with unease. "High Talon, the vessel's drive signature. While the commander spoke, we ran full-spectrum passives on the Halcyon. Its engine output, mass profile, power curve. A hesitation, the first I had ever heard from a Sskarn officer. The courier is more advanced than our flagship, not marginally, categorically, if a message boat carries that engineering. Then the message was the least of the message, Dehaum finished quietly. Yes, I noticed. He turned, and his 4 eyes found me at the edge of the bridge, and for a moment, 1 moment, 30 light years too late, I watched the oldest certainty in the fold look at the oldest survivor in the universe and waver. Then 160 years of victories closed over the waver like water over a stone. Advance the fleet, said Varric Dehaum. Battle formation. We make for the inner system at best speed, and signal all ships, the next human vessel we see we kill. The next human vessel they saw they could not kill, nobody could have. It took the fleet 9 days to cross from the ice halo toward the inner world's 9 days, that number again, and by now half the fleet had noticed the number 2, because I had put my story in them and stories teach you to see. 9 days of gathering dread through a system that kept declining to behave like prey. Human traffic simply flowed away from the fleet's path, unhurried, like water around a stone. Stations powered down, and their crews were gone before the fleet's optics could resolve them. It was, one of the bridge officers said aloud without meaning to, like invading an empty coat. Then at the orbit of the 5th world, the great banded giant, the coat moved. I was in the Hall of Tributes when the first engagement began, but I heard all of it, because Tessek came down during the battle, against every regulation in the fleet, and stood by my cage and relayed the deck reports with his voice shaking, and what I did not hear from him I read afterward in the fleet's own logs. Dehaum gave me access later. You will understand why later. Here is what happened, as plainly as I can tell it. The Sskarn Vanguard, 40 ships, the fleet's fastest, was sweeping the volume around the giant's moons when the moons answered, not with a fleet, with light. Human weapons emplacements, seeded through the moon system and dark for who knows how long, opened up in a single synchronized instant, and in the first 90 seconds of contact between humanity and the fold, 31 of the 40 Vanguard ships lost their engines. Not their lives, their engines. I need you to sit with the precision of that, the way the fleet had to. 31 warships, hit across a volume of millions of kilometers, by fire so exact that drive sections were carved away from crew sections along lines a surgeon would envy, and the crews lived. The Vanguard reported it in real time, and you can hear in the logs the exact moment the fleet's understanding of the war broke. A Vanguard captain, voice flat with disbelief. They hit us with everything all at once, total surprise, and our casualties are 7. 7 wounded, out of 40 crews. That is not possible. That is not restraint. That is aim. That is the sentence that went through the fleet like a spark through dry grass. That is aim. Because every soldier of the fold understood the arithmetic instantly, the way soldiers always understand the true arithmetic before their commanders admit it. A weapon that can take your engine without taking your life could have taken your life. 31 times in 90 seconds, the humans had chosen, which meant Sesse's parley had not been posture, which meant the whole system was a demonstration of a single unbearable fact. They are this strong and they are still choosing. The Vanguard's 31 dark hulls drifted, and then the second thing happened, the thing the fold had no doctrine for at all. Human ships came for them. Rescue tenders, big, blunt, brightly lit, unarmed as far as any sensor could tell, escorted by warships that positioned themselves. I want this understood between the disabled Sskarn hulls and the rest of the Sskarn fleet. Protecting the fold's wounded from the fold, because human doctrine had apparently studied Sskarn doctrine and knew the Dominion's regulations regarding disabled ships and spoiled assets. Dehaum ordered the fleet to press the attack. And here is the moment logged, time-stamped, witnessed on 200 bridges, where my warning stopped being a story and started being the weather. 19 ships of the second wave were slow to fire, not mutinous, not refusing. Slow gun crews taking 3 seconds where doctrine demanded 1, targeting officers rechecking firing solutions that did not need rechecking. A fleet's trigger discipline suddenly, mysteriously, thick as cold oil. Because the gun crews were conscripts of 61 folded species, and every one of them had heard the relic's curse, and every one of them had just watched the humans spare 31 Sskarn crews, and every one of them was doing the arithmetic of their grandmothers. 19 ships, slow to fire on rescue tenders. The humans' escorts returned fire on the ships that did shoot engines and weapons only, exact as scripture, and the tenders never stopped working, and within 11 hours every crew member of the disabled Vanguard, 400,000 souls, Sskarn and folded species alike, was aboard human hulls, alive, fed, and broadcasting. That was the masterstroke, and I say that with 3,000 years of watching wars behind me. The humans did not jam the prisoners' comms. They boosted them. Every rescued conscript who wanted to send a message home to the fleet, to a bunk brother, a cousin, a squad was given the bandwidth to do it, uncensored. By the second day after the engagement, the Fold fleet was receiving thousands of messages from its own captured crews, and the messages all said versions of the same impossible thing. They fed us. They set my leg. There is a human doctor here who learned to pronounce my name. They asked if we wanted our dead returned, and when we said yes, they stood at attention while we carried them. I do not understand these people. I am not afraid anymore, and that frightens me more than the battle did. Tesek read me some of them in the dark of the trophy hall, his voice unsteady. His bunk brother's cousin had been on the Vanguard. The message that came through was 6 words long in the Ithran tongue, and Tesek translated it for me, and then had to stop and stand very still for a while. The 6 words were, "It is true, all of it." "The officers are purging the message queues," he said finally, "deleting them faster than they arrive. It does not matter. They are memorized before they are deleted. The whole fleet is one repeated story now, deck to deck, and the story is yours, Relic, except it is not 3,000 years old anymore. It is yesterday. It has names in it that we know." He looked at me through the bars, and he asked the question that 61 species were asking in the dark of 300 hulls. How does the High Talon not see it? He is the finest commander the Fold has ever bred. How can he watch all of this and still go forward? And I gave him the only true answer, the one it cost my own empire everything to learn. Because he does see it, Tesek. That is the tragedy of the very best of them. A fool would have turned back at the parley, fools frighten easily, and fear would have saved him. Dehaum sees everything, understands everything, and cannot stop, because stopping requires him to say one sentence that 160 years of victory have removed from his mouth. The sentence is, "I was wrong." Empires do not fall because their commanders are blind. They fall because seeing is not the same as being able to say it. 9 more days, the fleet pressed inward. And I will summarize what the logs record, because the shape matters more than the blows. At the 4th world, the small red one, a human fleet finally met them ship to ship, and it was smaller than the Folds, visibly smaller, perhaps a third the hulls, and it dismantled the Fold's entire left wing in 14 hours while suffering no losses that any Sskarn sensor could confirm. Engines, weapons, sensors. The humans fought like they were defusing the fleet rather than fighting it, and their rescue tenders followed the battle like gleaners follow a harvest, and the messages home kept coming, thousands more voices now, and by the time the Fold reached the orbit of the Blue World's own moon, Varric Dehaum commanded 318 ships, of which 91 had already gone dark and been emptied by human rescuers. And his political officers finally admitted to him, in a meeting whose recording I have heard. Perhaps half of what remained. Half High Talon, his own security chief said. Half the fleet is past the tipping point. They are not planning mutiny, it is stranger than mutiny. They are simply waiting to be rescued. We have soldiers slowing their own damage control so their ships will go dark faster. We have gun crews who have not landed a hit in 2 engagements, and our diagnostics can find nothing wrong with the guns. And in the silence that followed, on the bridge of the mouth that closes, in orbit of the moon of the world he had crossed 30 light years to fold, Varric Dehaum said, very quietly, the first 4 words of the sentence he did not have. The relic told me. He sent for me at the hour the ship pretended to sleep. 2 soldiers walked me through 14 decks of a flagship that no longer sounded like a held breath. It sounded like a hospital ward the night before a surgery nobody believes in. Crews stood in small knots in the corridors, not talking or talking too quietly for the monitors, and they watched me pass, the relic, the curse, the old thing that had stood on the bridge and told them all of this in advance. And here is what I want in the record. Not one of them looked at me with hatred. They looked at me the way you look at a physician who diagnosed the illness everyone else called a rumor. With fear, yes. But underneath the fear, something no empire can survive its soldiers feeling toward a prisoner. Gratitude. They brought me to the Hall of Tributes, my own hall, my own cage hanging empty from its ceremonial chain, and Varric Dehaum was standing at the viewport with his back to me, and beyond him, filling half the dark, was Earth. I had not seen it in 3,000 years. I want to try to tell you what that was like, and I already know I will fail. You must understand that I had seen it before from exactly this vantage, from the bridge of a warship in orbit of its moon, dressed in targeting script. 3,000 years ago it had been dimmer, fewer lights on the night side. Now the dark half of the world glittered like a jewel case, cities strung along coastlines I still knew the shapes of, and in orbit around it, everywhere, patient, unhurried, the lights of their fleets, moving like slow constellations. It was the most defended sky I have ever seen in my life, and it did not look like a fortress. That is the thing I cannot make empires understand. It looked like a porch light, left on. For whoever might come, in whatever condition. Leave us, Dehaum said, and the soldiers left, and for the first time since the moon with no name I stood unchained. He did not turn around for a long time. When he finally spoke, he spoke to the planet. 91 ships dark, he said. Half of what remains, waiting, my own security chief's word, waiting to be rescued. My political officers are drafting documents blaming each other. My fleet has stopped being a weapon and become an audience. A pause. I have run the remaining scenarios 11 times. Would you like to know what my own war plotters return when I order them to model a path to victory? They return nothing, I said, because there is no path to victory. There was never a path to victory, High Talon. There was only ever a path to the truth, and you are standing at the end of it. The wet clicking once, almost gentle, you are enjoying this. No, I said, and I meant it with everything 3,000 years had left me. No, I have stood where you are standing. I know exactly what tomorrow costs. I would not wish this night on the officer who crushed my garden. He turned then, and I saw what 160 years of never being wrong looks like on the night it ends. His plates had lost something, not color. Sskarn plates do not pale, arrangement. The bearing that had made 200 officers lean toward him had gone out of his body, and what stood at the viewport was just an old soldier, scarred down one side, asking the oldest survivor in the universe the question he had actually summoned me to ask. How did you live with it? He said. After 40,000 of you went home carrying the story. Most of you found ways to set it down, new lives, new names, 1,100 worlds of places to hide from it. You did not set it down. You carried it for 3,000 years alone to a moon with no name, and you carved it into stone that grows a finger width a century. How does anyone live with being the one who knows? And I understood finally why I was on that ship. Not a trophy, not even a warning. Varric Dehaum's officers had crossed 40 light years to net him a mirror, and he had spent the whole campaign trying not to look into it, and now there was nowhere else to look. You live with it badly, I said. I will not lie to you tonight of all nights. You live with it badly and then less badly, and the thing that makes it less badly is not time. It is telling it. Every time the story leaves your mouth and enters someone younger, it weighs less. The 40,000 who went home and told it, they healed Dehaum. They dissolved an empire and they healed most of them because they turned the wound into a warning. I exiled myself and tended graves and told no one for 600 years, and my hands still shake. That is your answer. The ones who tell it live. The ones who carry it silently become me, and I do not recommend becoming me. He was quiet. Earth turned beneath us, minutely, indifferently. Tomorrow they will come for this ship, he said. You know that. They have taken the fleet apart from the outside in, and the mouth that closes is the last tooth. Sesse's people will disarm her and dark her and empty her like all the others, and they will do it gently, and the gentleness will finish what the campaign started. His small eyes found me. My political officers have a shuttle prepared. They believe I should withdraw, return to the Dominion, report they are calling it an anomalous defensive environment. Rebuild. Return someday with a fleet designed for this enemy. And you asked them what a fleet designed for this enemy would look like, I said. And they had no answer, because the only fleet designed for this enemy is a fleet that does not come. I asked them, said Varric Dehaum, something worse. I asked them, designed to counter what exactly? Name the weapon. And my chief plotter, who is the finest tactical mind of his generation, stood in front of the full staff and could not say the word mercy out loud. He physically could not say it. He called it the enemy's retention doctrine. The clicking again, and this time it was unmistakably laughter, and it was the saddest sound I heard in the entire war. Retention doctrine. We are the fold, old one. We have folded 61 species, and we cannot pronounce the name of the thing that beat us. He crossed the hall slowly, past the dead queen's crown, still turning, still searching, and stopped in front of my empty cage. He looked at it for a while. I am not taking the shuttle, he said. I know. Tomorrow when they board, my officers expect me to die on this deck. It is the custom. A high Talon does not survive the loss of a grand fleet. There is a blade in my quarters that has ended 4 commanders before me, all of them my betters, and the custom is very clear. He turned. Tell me why I should not follow it, and do not offer me comfort. Offer me what you offered my fleet. Arithmetic. So I gave him arithmetic. Because dead, you are a martyr, and the fold survives martyrs. Your death will become a recruiting hymn. The political officers on that shuttle will land in the Dominion with a story about a great commander betrayed by alien witchcraft and conscript cowardice, and they will build statues of you, and the statues will say avenge him, and in 50 years another fleet comes, larger, angrier, and everything that happened here happens again with higher casualties. Your blade does not end the war, High Talon. It reloads it. But alive, you are the one thing the fold has no defense against. You are the report they cannot purge. 160 years, 61 campaigns, the most credible voice your species has ever produced, walking home, on your own feet, and telling the truth. They can execute a conscript who tells this story. They can purge a message queue. Tell me, Commander, what does the Dominion do with you? He stood very still. 3,000 years ago, I said, 40,000 of us went home and told it, and we were nobody. Fire officers, deck wardens, children in uniforms, and it still dissolved 1,100 worlds. You are not nobody. You are the Empire's own certainty, and if the certainty comes home and says I was wrong, I stopped. Held his eyes, all 4 of them. You could not say that sentence on your bridge. I watched you fail to say it. But you have 1 night left, and I am the only witness, and this hall keeps secrets. So try it, just once. Not for the fleet, for yourself. Try the sentence. The mouth that closes hummed around us. Earth turned. The crown circled in its column, searching. And High Talon Varric Dehaum, first of his name, unbeaten in 160 years, looked out at the small blue world that had asked for none of this, and said, in a voice I had to lean forward to hear, I was wrong. His plates shuddered, a long ripple, nose to tail, like a building settling onto new foundations. He said it again, louder. I was wrong. The relic warned me at the edge of the drift, and I was wrong. And then something came out of him that his species has no word for, a sound between the wet clicking and a groan, a sound I recognized because I had made it myself in a flooded compartment 3,000 years ago. The sound a soldier makes when the story he has served his whole life dies before he does, and he finds, to his amazement, that he is still standing. "There," I said quietly. "That is the whole weapon, D-Helm. That is everything the humans are. They build a universe where that sentence is survivable. That is all mercy is. Now you know it can be said, and tomorrow you will find out what it costs, and I will tell you the secret in advance, because someone told me once and it saved my life." "Tell me." "It costs less than the blade." "They came at dawn. Ships dawn, there is no dawn in orbit, but crews keep the fiction, and I have always found that touching, that even conquerors carry a homeworld sunrise in their clocks. I was on the bridge when it happened, because D-Helm ordered it. The relic witnesses," he told his staff, and no one argued, because by then no one argued with anything. The bridge of the greatest warship in Dominion history had the atmosphere of a funeral where the deceased was attending. The humans did not rush. That was the last lesson, and it was the hardest one for the officers to watch. There was no final battle in any sense the Fold's histories would recognize. What came for the mouth that closes at dawn was not an armada arrayed for glory. It was a work crew. 40 human warships in a loose, unhurried lattice, and behind them the big blunt rescue tenders, lit up like festival barges, and the whole formation approached the way surgeons approach a patient. No hate in it, no hunger, just a job that had been done 91 times already and would be done properly this time too. D-Helm could have fired first. The fleet's records will show, and I made sure they show it, that the last order Varric D-Helm ever gave as a commander of the Fold was this one. "All batteries hold. Not surrender." Sskarn cannot surrender. The language reserves the word for objects, and that fact alone should have told them centuries ago something was wrong at the root of things. Hold. It was the largest sentence his rank allowed him to say with his crews watching, and every human analyst who reviewed the logs afterward understood it perfectly, because humans are fluent in the words people cannot quite say. The humans disarmed his ship anyway. You do not leave 31 kilometers of teeth armed, whatever its commander's heart is doing, and I watched it happen from the inside, and I will tell you honestly, it was the most beautiful and terrible thing I have seen in 3,000 years, and I once watched a leviathan swim between moons. Light without heat, fire without rage. The human ships took the mouth that closes apart the way you would take a weapon from a sleepwalker. Engine housings carved away in clean sections, weapon spines severed at the roots, every strike placed with that surgical, unbearable aim, and the great ship shuddering and groaning around us, but the decks stayed sealed. 200,000 crew aboard, and the humans threaded their fire through 31 kilometers of architecture without opening one inhabited compartment to the dark. Halfway through, the fleet signals officer began reading off the damage in a flat voice, and then his voice stopped being flat. "They have severed the primary drive, secondary drive. They are high Talon. They are avoiding the reactor housings by wider margins than our own safety regulations require. They are being more careful with this ship than we are." And he put his face in his work limbs, at his post, in front of everyone, and no one reprimanded him, because what regulation covers it? What do you charge a soldier with comprehending? The lights went out at mid-morning ship's time. The engines died, the guns were gone, and the mouth that closes the ending of all things, the teeth of the universe, went dark and cold and silent, and became what every ship becomes when its power dies. It became something drowning. And then we waited. And the waiting is the part I most need you to understand, because the waiting is where the Fold actually ended. 200,000 crew in the dark in emergency lighting on a dead flagship, and Doctrine said, "Resist boarding." Doctrine was very clear. Every corridor was to be a killing ground. There were racks of weapons at every junction for exactly this hour. The racks stayed full. Deck by deck in the amber emergency light, the crews of the mouth that closes sat down at their posts and did what Commander Sesse had told them to do, in the clear, in their own language, back at the edge of the ice. Stay calm and wait for us. We are coming for every single one of you. 61 species had spent the whole campaign deciding whether to believe her. The dark made up their minds. I walked those corridors, Dehaum walked them with me, his last inspection unescorted, unarmed. And everywhere soldiers of the fold looked up at their commander with the weapons racked behind them, untouched, and Dehaum looked back and nobody said anything because everything was already said. On one deck, a Ithran conscript was singing softly something old, and the ones around her were listening, and Dehaum stopped and listened too, for a long moment and then walked on. 11 days, he said to me quietly in the dark between decks. Her people lasted 11 days against us. It is on my wall, a silence. I have walked past that wall for 90 years and I never once heard any of them sing. The boarding began in the 14th hour. And I want to describe the first human I saw with my own eyes in 3,000 years, because she is in my stone garden now, and she has earned her place in this story. The breaching teams did not blow the airlocks. They knocked. I am telling you what happened. The human rescue crews attached to the hull equalized pressure and then transmitted on the ship's own internal frequency in trade Sskarn. United Systems Rescue Detail. We're opening this door in 30 seconds. Nobody needs to be brave. Step back from the lock, keep your hands where we can see them, and let's get you home. Nobody needs to be brave. 3,000 years I have listened to soldiers talk, and I have never heard 6 words disarm a warship more completely. The lock cycled, and the first human aboard the mouth that closes was a rescue sergeant of maybe 30, compact, gray-eyed, in an armored suit scuffed colorless by 91 previous hulls, and she stepped through the lock into a corridor of towering Sskarn soldiers with racked weapons 3 steps away, and she pushed her visor up. She showed them her face, in range of everything, and she looked around at the fold, at the teeth of the ending of all things, and she said, "Okay, who's hurt?" That was first contact between humanity and the crew of the Dominion flagship, not a demand, not terms, who's hurt. And a young soldier near the lock, and my heart's turned over, because it was Tessek. It was my ration bearer with his pale-edged plates, stationed at the lock because of course the youngest get the death posts. Tessek looked down at this small, unarmored creature from the world his empire had come to fold, and he answered her, and his voice broke in the middle like a wave. "Deck 9, he said. "The drive severance, there are burn casualties on Deck 9, please." "Then Deck 9's where we're going," said the sergeant. "Lead the way, big man." And Tessek, third caste, folded, carrying his grandmother's teeth to a war he was never asked about, turned and led the enemy through his own ship to save his own people. And that, if you want a timestamp, is the exact moment the Sskarn Dominion ceased to exist. Everything afterward was paperwork. They emptied the flagship in 3 days. 200,000 crew, cross-decked to the tenders in an operation the humans ran like they had rehearsed it for generations. Because they had. Because rescue is their doctrine, the way conquest was ours. The wounded went first, then the frightened, then the dead, and the dead went with honors, everyone. Human sailors standing at attention in the cold of the cargo decks, while conscripts of 61 species carried their fallen past, and I watched Sskarn officers weep at that, plates rattling, warriors of an undefeated empire coming apart completely, because I had told them this exact thing on the bridge at the edge of the drift, and there is no armor anywhere in the universe rated against it. Dehaum stayed, of course he stayed. Custom said die. I had talked him out of the blade, but 160 years of custom still held him to the deck, and he sent his crews ahead of him hull by hull. And on the 3rd day, when the flagship was empty and the air was going bad in the last powered section, the sergeant with the gray eyes found the 2 of us in the hall of tributes, the old commander and the old relic, sitting in the dark between a dead queen's crown and a fossil heart. "Time to go," she said. "This is my ship," Helm said. "You have my crews, you have my fleet. Doctrine is satisfied, leave me the hull." The sergeant looked at him for a moment. She was very tired, 3 days and 92 ships of this. And she said, "And I watched 3,000 years fold shut like a closing book," she said. "Yeah, I know what this ship did." Helm's eyes came up. "Hold still anyway." He looked at me. I had told him those words on his own bridge, 41 jumps ago, in front of 200 laughing officers. He looked at me and the small eyes were shaking now, both of them, and he said hoarse, "Did you tell her? Did you tell them to say?" "I have been in a cage, Helm," I said. "I told no one anything. That is simply what they say. It is what they have always said. It is what they are." And the last commander of the Grand Fold Fleet let a human rescue sergeant take his arm and lead him off his flagship. And the record will show that High Talon Varric Helm did not walk off the mouth that closes defeated. He walked off it rescued. His species will need a century to understand the difference. It changes everything. The hospital ship was called Meridian Grace, and she smelled like antiseptic and cooking, and I could not place it for a full day, and then I wept when I did rain. Humans pumped the smell of their weather through their ships. 3,000 years, and they are still incapable of leaving home properly, and thank every god of every fallen empire for it. They gave me quarters, not a cage. They gave me clothes that were not gray. A human doctor examined me for 9 hours with the delight of a child who has been handed the oldest living thing in the universe, and pronounced me criminally undermaintained but basically immortal, which, respectfully, is showing off. I did not understand half of what she said. I understood that she learned to pronounce my name properly, with the glottal fall my own species had abandoned before it died, and practiced it until it was right. On the second day, Commander Amara Sese came to see me, in person. She was smaller than the display had made her, and older, and she still carried a cup of something hot, and she sat down across from me like we were neighbors. "Keth-Amaru of the Vol Surath," she said. "Fire officer, second watch, cruiser Unbroken Hymn, pulled from compartment 6 on the 3rd of November 3,000 and change years ago by Petty Officer Dana Ellis off the rescue ship Gallant. She let that land. We keep records, you understand, every rescue, all of them. There's a hall on Earth with the name of every enemy we ever pulled out of the water, and yours has been on it for 3,000 years. And when your name showed up on the manifest of a Dominion trophy hall, I want you to know that my government held a meeting about you, a SIP. You have descendants in a sense, Ellis's family, 6 generations now. They know your name too. The story of the old fire officer who confessed for 2 hours in the water is their story, they tell it at gatherings. The line he said, 'Hold still anyway,' it's carved over the door of the rescue academy in his hometown." I could not speak for some time. She waited. Humans are good at waiting. It is the talent underneath all their other talents. "You knew the fleet was coming," I finally managed. "For how long?" "Years. We know everything that moves in this arm, Keth-Amaru. That stopped being difficult a long time ago. Difficulty isn't why it took 41 days. She set the cup down. "We could have ended that fleet at the ice line in an afternoon. I want you of all people to know that, because you of all people will understand what I say next. The campaign wasn't ours. It was theirs. 61 species on those decks needed the time to hear your story, time to watch us choose, time to do the arithmetic themselves. Mercy doesn't work at gunpoint speed. It has to be witnessed slowly until the witness can't call it a trick anymore. You taught us that." Her eyes were steady on me. "Your 40,000 did. 3,000 years ago, your survivors went home and dissolved 1,100 worlds without our firing a shot, and Earth watched it happen, and Earth took notes. Everything we did to that fleet in the last 41 days, the parley, the aim, the boosted messages, the knock at the airlock, all of it is doctrine we built out of what your people did with our mercy. You are not a relic, Keth-Amaru. You are a co-author. I came down here to say that to your face. I am 3,140 years old, and I put my head in my hands in front of her, and she moved her chair around beside mine and sat with me while I did not say anything at all, because humans also know when the talking is done. They held the return ceremony a week later in Meridian Grace's main bay, with Earth filling the viewports. 2 million crew going home, every survivor, exactly as promised at the ice line, in their own hulls where the hulls could be re-engined, in human transports where they could not. No tribute. No chains. One requirement, the old requirement, unchanged in 3,000 years. Carry your own wounded aboard yourselves and see them settled, and know what it costs to keep them alive. Tesek found me in the crowd before boarding. He was different, stood different. He had spent the week as a translator for the rescue teams, and the humans had given him a patch for it, a small embroidered thing, a wave and a hand, and he wore it on his plating where his rank used to sit. They asked me to stay, he said. The rescue service. They take anyone, did you know that? Any species. There are Ithran in their academy. There are relic, there are species on that hospital ship I have only seen on the wall by the airlock, the wall, and they are wearing rescue patches and complaining about the food. His plates shifted, that gesture I could finally read now after everything. Wonder. It had been wonder the whole time. But I am going home first. My grandmother's people, someone has to carry this back to them. Someone has to stand in the 11 days hall and tell them how it ends. He looked at me. You said the ones who tell it live. I am going to go live very loudly, old one. Tesek, I said. On the moon, you looked back at my garden 2 seconds. Why? He was quiet a moment. Because it was the only thing on that whole world that someone had loved, he said, and we landed on it, and I thought, I remember exactly what I thought. I thought, someone should at least look. His plates rattled softly. I did not know then that looking is how it starts. He went up the ramp. I never saw him again. But I have heard him, everyone in this arm of the galaxy has heard him by now, because the Dominion's dissolution is being broadcast in the open, world by folded world. 61 liberations in 14 years and counting. And one of the loudest voices in it belongs to a third-caste translator with pale-edged plates who tells a story about a knock on an airlock in 6 words. Nobody needs to be brave. And D-Helm, you want to know about D-Helm? He asked to see me once more before his transport left. They had not caged him either. The humans do not cage anyone. It is the single fact about them that broke his officers fastest, and I found him at a viewport, watching the remains of his fleet being shepherded toward the jump line by human tugs, gently, like something wounded. They offered me asylum, he said. Earth did, the commander herself. A world of my own choosing, a quiet life, no extradition. The Dominion will not be kind to me, and she knows it, and she offered me the door. The wet clicking soft. I told her what you told me in the trophy hall. Alive and home, I am the report they cannot purge. She said, and his plates did the long ripple nose to tail. She said, yeah, we were hoping you'd say that. But we had to offer, it's sort of our whole thing. It is, I said, it really is their whole thing. I have been drafting the report for 9 days. He turned from the viewport. It is 4 words long, and then it is 400 pages long, but it is the 4 words that will do the work, and I wanted the author's blessing before I file it. The report opens. The relic was right. He looked at me with all 4 eyes, steady now, steadier than I had ever seen them. 160 years I collected trophies, Keth-Amaru. The crown, the heart, you. I understand now what I actually collected. I spent my whole life gathering the evidence for my own conviction and calling it a hall of tributes. He extended a work limb, the human gesture. He had learned the human gesture, and I took it. Grow old, gardener. Older, I mean. Somebody has to keep the whole story. His fleet jumped for home 11 days later, and the last transmission, the mouth that closes surviving crews received from human space, sent in the clear to every hull, was not a warning and not a farewell. It was a standing invitation, and it is still broadcast today at the ice line to everything that enters that system with its weapons hot. I have heard it myself. It says, "This is Earth. We know why you've come. Turn around and lose nothing. Come ahead and lose only your certainty. Either way, when your ship goes dark, hold still. We are already on our way." Me, I stayed. They offered me anything, passage anywhere, a moon of my own, a place in their archives as the oldest voice in known space. I asked for one thing, a stretch of coastline in a small gray town where the rain comes in off the sea sideways, where a rescue academy stands with 6 words carved over its door, and where the descendants of a 19-year-old diver still gather in autumn and tell the story of the monster their grandfather refused to drop. They gave it to me. They gave me the hillside above the water. I garden again. Stone the old way, one finger width a century. The humans bring their children up the hill to watch it grow, which is to say, to watch nothing happen. And human children are the only species I have ever met who find that funny instead of boring. The first crystal I planted faces the sea. It has a name, like all of them. It says ELLIS. And when the storms come in off the water and the light breaks low through the clouds behind it, it scatters green fire down the whole hillside. And I sit with it, and we watch the water together, the way we did once before, a long time ago, when I was young and drowning and he was 19 and would not let go. The universe's oldest survivor begged them to avoid Earth. They ignored the warning. And Earth did to them exactly what it did to me, 3,000 years ago, in the cold and the dark of a flooded compartment. The only thing it has ever done, the only weapon it has ever needed, the thing I crossed 30 centuries to learn the true name of. It knew what they had done. And it held them anyway.